The other thing that I wanted to go over today is curves and Nurbs curves and extruding stuff along Nurbs curves. So first step to that is actually creating a Nurbs curve. If you go up to the create menu, well, actually here, let's start with the surfaces and curves tool. So there's a bunch of default ones. The circle is the one I use the most. I hate this square with a deep and burning passion because it's just made up of 4 random separate lines, and I don't use it because it's awful. There's better ways to make those. There's also a bunch of different options for adding different types of curves, slicing curves, all that stuff. I usually just go up into the curves create tool. And there's 2 types of curves that I normally use. All of these will pretty much work. Normally I use the CV curve or EP curve tool, but again, the Bezier curve works if you're familiar with Illustrator. These 2 I don't really worry about. Pencil curve tool should theoretically let you just like draw a weird line, and then it will just like convert that into a curve. Do note with this that it sort of attaches itself to a particular plane. So in this case, like when I drew it, what I drew like this, if I look at it from the top, it's really, really stretched. So if you want to make sure that your shape is like a specific shape, I would go into an orthographic view and draw that. But yeah, so that's kind of fun. Then you can go in, there's, a heck of a lot of CV curves in this. But what you can do, and I'll come back in and I guess go over this again later, is if you want, you can go into curves and then rebuild, open the settings, and basically what you're going to go and do is rebuild your curve with a specific number of spans. So this is like really, and this is kind of like, imagine this is like stroke smoothing or something in Photoshop. I'm just going to go through and like remove a lot of these control vertices, because right now we have probably like 50 or 60 of them, which is a bit excessive. And it's also helping to hold the shape of this like wiggle in the line. So we're going to go through and just set rebuild type to uniform. And then most of this I just sort of leave how it is. It seems to work pretty well for me. And then number of spans, you just set this to be whatever, like however many control vertices kind of that you want. You can mess with the structure of the curve, so I'll go over that a little bit later. For now, just probably assume that you want cubic. If you want like curvy curves, set this to 2, 3, 5, like any of these. 1 is going to give you hard lines. What we should be able to do is hit apply, and what it does is it goes through and it basically redefines the curve with fewer control points. And in this case, I think I had too few, so I'm going to try bumping this up to maybe 40. And you can see that does a little bit of smoothing, and there's definitely way less control curves around. So could potentially be a good way to sort of redefine a pencil curve. Try 30. And you can see it is changing the shape of the curve, but like the overall feel of it is like pretty much the same. You can still go in and sort of move things around manually if you need to. So again, the difference between, that's like cubic, is if you look at this, basically what's happening is I'm moving this curve point, and it's changing the curve a little bit up through this one. So basically for this, if we're looking at like this area of curve right in here, that's being affected by 3 points. This one, and this one. And that's what cubic means. So if this was, if you set this to 5, basically you would have like 5 little points in here sort of controlling things. If you set this to linear, this is usually how I end up sort of remaking the square thing. There's no curvature at all. It is just straight lines from point A to point B. So I don't find this particularly helpful, but what you can do if you want is go in and sort of make your own better versions of the square that are actually properly square. Either way, so I'm just going to go ahead and grab this and rebuild this. And you can also set this up manually. So actually, I kind of like the pencil tool, honestly. But normally I'll just sort of start with the CV curve tool and just go ahead and draw in my own curves, and you can kind of see that it's doing exactly the same thing. It's just a slightly different way to create the original curve. So that exists, and then you can kind of move these up and down as needed. I'm going to tweak this to be a really ugly demo object really quick, because I need a really ugly demo object. I'll get rid of this guy. All right, so that's a curve. That's the CV curve tool. EP curve tool is really, really similar. The only real difference between these two is that if we look at the EP curve tool, it kind of just creates things a little bit differently, where like you'll notice when you're laying down the curve, it makes this little point, and then you click and it makes another point, and it's connecting the points directly to each other. So when you're setting it up, those little points are directly on the lines of the curve. And then when you go in, you still have the control vertices later. So like functionally, it kind of behaves the same way when you're done. Like I said, the only real difference there is that the CV curve tool, when you're putting dots down, you can see it's not connecting point to point. It's going sort of between the points that you set up. So EP can be nice if you're trying to like trace a specific shape or something like that. You can just sort of click on the line. You know, if you're trying to trace like a specific neon sign or something, you can just like click on the pattern and it'll kind of like draw a curve pretty well. All right, so that's basically curves. I guess sort of like how to set them up. Right click and just do control vertex instead of like the traditional vertex setup. And then just drag all these crazy little lines around to sort of, you know, change the shape of your curve. This is really pretty similar to Photoshop and other things. But yeah, so we have this weird thing. I'll show you fun stuff you can do with this in the next video.